Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting in the Yola-Amity Hills. This is in the heart of the Willamette Valley in Oregon. I'm sitting at Grochau Vineyards with John Grochau. John, tell us about where we are and about your winery.
Well, the Yola-Amity Hills is a unique part of the Willamette Valley. It's at the mouth or the end of the mouth of the Van Duzer corridor, so it's a special place. We get very cool evenings from the cool ocean air coming in, the Van Duzer corridor being a low land route to the coast, so we get these very quick, cool downs in the evening. Yeah, I'll be driving home. I live in Portland. I'll be driving home from here, and I'll leave here and it'll be 72 degrees. I'll go 10 miles north, it'll be 82.
Wow.
It's that drastic. But this is where we chose to have our home because we like this growing area quite a bit. But yes, we started our winery in 2002, but we've only been in this location since 2015. But yeah, I started in 2002, just 300 cases after years of working for other wineries and in the restaurant industry.
And what is your total case production now?
We're right around 10,000 cases.
Oh, that's a lot of growth.
It's, yes, it was unintended, but sometimes you end up places you don't intend.
That's true.
Yeah.
So we're sitting here in your tasting room. Are we surrounded by vineyards that you own? Are you working with estate fruit, purchased fruit, combination?
Unfortunately, we don't have an estate as of yet. We are surrounded by vineyards I work with, but not vineyards I own. Closest to us is Redford Weddell Vineyard, just right down the hill, where we source Gamay and Pinot Noir. Bjornson Vineyard and Zenith Vineyard are just 10 miles south, where we source Pinot Noir and Gamay Noir. We're in close proximity to a lot of vineyards. Oh, and Vivid Vineyard just to the north, and there's more Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So, yeah, it's definitely our home AVA.
And obviously Pinot Noir, I mean, that's the bulk of what's here. And you mentioned Gamay. Are there any other interesting grapes you're doing here?
Yes, we do Melon de Bourgogne in small amounts. We also do, Chardonnay, which is not unique, but there's plenty of it. But stylistically, we go for a bit more of an old world style, brighter acids, not big, rich, sweet oak. And then we do some one-offs. Last year, we did a little Albarino. Because a friend who has a vineyard had a little extra, and I thought, what the heck, I'll buy it. I think it was a half a ton. And so I have one 500-liter barrel of Albarino.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's just... and then sometimes Tempranillo and Syrah from Southern Oregon. But really Gamay, Pinot Noir, Melon de Bourgogne and Chardonnay are the focuses.
And where are your wines available?
We're in about half the states now. So the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, California. We're in, this is always a bad test for me. Arizona, Texas. Kind of have to go geographically around the country.
Right. And how many of your states do you know?
Oklahoma, Arkansas, Florida, North and South Carolina, the Eastern Seaboard, Virginia, D.C., Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. And then we go inland. We go Michigan, Tennessee, Ohio, Kentucky. Wow. This is where I start forgetting. And then Quebec, we sell quite a bit in Quebec, and then a little bit in Denmark, and tiny amounts in the UK and Hong Kong.
Wow. Yeah. Well, we just took a journey around the US, so thank you. Yeah. That's fantastic. So tell me, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Well, other than my parents drinking a lot of wine, relevant to wine for me, my parents did not drink beer or anything like that. They drank wine and cocktails. It was the 70s. Probably more cocktails. But when I was a senior in high school, my brother was living in France. He was living in Avignon. And my family went over to visit him. And we went to Chateauneuf-du-Pape. and tasted wine. And this, I think, the first time I tasted wine, really, and I was very young and inexperienced, and it was good. And I got too intoxicated with my parents, but that, and then later in my 4 years later, I lived in France. I lived in the Loire Valley, and while I was racing bicycles at the time for a French team, amateur team there, and I didn't drink a whole lot of wine, but it was around a lot, and I was riding, and I lived in Tours, right in the Loire, and so Saumur-Champigny and Chinon, and the chateaus, well, Chinon Chateau, but also these growing regions. So I just seeing the whole thing rather than just seeing the labels. It's like, oh, Chinon's a place, and this is, oh, the vineyards around Chinon, and so forth. And start learning, but I guess those were the kind of the first building blocks.
And obviously you've traveled and lived abroad and drunk a lot of good wines. You said you worked in the restaurant industry, so I'm sure you drink a lot of really good wine. Is there one particular wine that stands out as a pretty memorable wine to drink? Yes.
Well, there's kind of the aha moment-ish of wines, if I could call it as such, but it was a Domaine de Monty, Burgundy, a Volnay. I believe the vintage was 92. But it was just one of those kind of transcendent kind of wines, not the best vintage in Burgundy to my recollection, but just so pretty and opulent and opulent yet austere, opulent in aromatics and just evolution of the wine. It was very just intriguing, just kept increasingly drawing me in. Every time you take a whiff, it's something else. You pick out something else. That was a big kind of like, wow, this is so much deeper than I thought it was. It's not just a good drink. It can go really deep and further, much further. So having worked in the restaurant industry, were you a sommelier? Or? No, I was only it's common it gets written that way. And I feel really bad because the restaurant where I worked a long time, Higgins in Portland, and learned a lot from the wine buyer there, this Somm. This is before they even used that term much, back in the early 90s. It gets thrown out there that I was the Somm there, and I was never the Somm there, nor have I ever said I was. I was a waiter. I was a busser who became a waiter and a bartender and kind of ran the floor a few nights a week. So no, but I was presented with a lot of wines while working there. I mean, when somebody would bring in a nice bottle or sales reps bring in things. So I was able to taste a lot of good wine by working in restaurants. So having been on that side of the business and having traveled, who do you think culturally drinks the best in terms of quality? That's a tough one. I mean, boy, Italy, Spain, France, Portugal. I mean, it's choose Germany. I mean, what do you like? I mean, I have a very old world palate. I like old world wines, and the value that comes from there is amazing. I was in Spain a couple of years ago, and I don't think I ever spent more than €4.50 for a glass of wine while I was there. Well, except for the one time, there's a Vega Sicilia Unico, which is our super high-end bottle. For 300, or it's €25 a glass, but it's a €325 bottle of wine. So it was like,
still a really good glass price.
But I mean, there's great values in Southern America too. But by and large, I like the style of the old world relative to South American or Australian or West.
So if we were to invite ourselves into your home and go into your cellar, what would we find in there?
A lot of Beaujolais, Muscadet. If I had more money, it would be more white Burgundy. But I'm in the wine business. I like to say I entered the wine business backwards without making a lot of money before I started it. I started with no money, and I still have no money. I mean, it's all relative,
of course.
But yeah, but no, old world wines, and more and more, I like those vibrant juicy and energetic, youthful wines. And so the Beaujolais and Barbera, actually a lot of Piemontese wines, Barolo, Barbaresco, and Barbera. I just love those wines as well.
Yeah. So do you think, you're working with some really unique varieties. You're in a place where Pinot Noir kind of reigns as king. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No, I don't. I think, we keep, climate's getting warmer and it's easier to get more things ripe here. And, honestly, Pinot Noir was the perfect variety in Oregon for a long time. But as it gets warmer, I personally feel that Gamay is even better for the Willamette Valley now because it holds its acidity better. It ripens later. It holds up to disease better. It's not as temperamental. But it ripens slower and later, which works really nice for these warmer summers. But opinion. Yeah.
That's what it's all about. Yeah. Wine isn't about opinions. So speaking of opinions, what's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
On the record? Sometimes it helps sell. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
It's a great sales tool because a lot of people are not confident in their taste. They're learning and they want to be steered in directions that they want to know what people like and what's good. I don't live or die by them, and I often just don't submit. But there are a few critics who I have a tremendous respect for, and I love to read their reviews, and I like it when they review my wines, Josh Reynolds in particular, because every time he writes a review, or almost every time of my wines, it's like, yeah. His palate, we're in sync. Whereas sometimes with other critics, it's like, doesn't sound anything like the wine I remember or taste. Everybody has different palates and tastes different things. So there's no right or wrong there. Mm-hmm. But it can skew market.
Yeah. So because, people have different palates and many people have probably not had the opportunity to taste your wine yet. Mm-hmm. For someone who hasn't tasted your wines, what do you think they're missing out on?
Well, for us, since I do have that old world palate, we definitely shoot for a balance of fruity and savory. We don't want the wines to be all about big, vibrant fruit. We definitely, it is a fruit, comes from a fruit, so we want it to be fruity, but we don't want it to be monolithic and just all about the fruit. So we, between picking decisions and fermentation technique, we do a fair amount of whole cluster. Every year it changes based on the ripeness of the fruit. But so we look for that balance of fruity and savory. We also like a lot of texture in the wines. We want wines that can really hold up to foods, proteins well. I wouldn't call the wines acidic, but I wouldn't call them overly soft. They're just kind of fairly middle road that way as far as the acid. But we like tannin, we like texture, we like fruity, savory, and very aromatically driven wines. Not unlike the way I talked about that Monty Burgundy. That keeps evolving and changing rather than just being about this. This is what you get. Mm-hmm.
So if space aliens were to land on your property right now or here in the tasting room, which of your wines would you present them with?
If not knowing, I would probably present them with the biggest wine, but simply because it's, the easiest. But that's a tough one because with most people, human beings, I generally will start with the most generous because it would be more pleasing to more palates, but you don't know what they eat or drink. That's so they might drink battery acid, so that might be the absolute opposite. So who knows?
Well, assuming they had the perfect palate for you.
Yeah. But for me, it would be a single vineyard Pinot Noir, like a Bjornson Vineyard or Zenith Vineyard, two Eola Hills vineyards that I work with.
And of the more generous style, which wine is that of yours?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned before, on occasion we do this Syrah and Tempranillo, our 2015 Upper Five Vineyard Syrah, which is from Rogue Valley, Southern Oregon, would be very generous, but also very savory too. There's a lot of whole cluster in that wine.
So you've expressed that you have more of an old world palate. I understand that, but if you had to choose, or I guess, do you have to choose red, white, or rosé?
I mostly drink white now. It would be champagne probably. Desert island wine would be champagne.
Well, there was my next question, still or sparkling, so.
Yeah. I mean, from Melon de Bourgogne, Muscadet, Chablis, white Burgundies are,
yum.
But more and more, like Verdejo. I can't even start rolling off the Italian grapes because I don't remember. There's so many native Italian grapes that it's like
Gavi, Vermentino,
Verdicchio. It's just like I've been up since 6 or 5:30, so I'm a little
fair enough.
Yeah,
it's bottling day. I understand. Yeah. So you make very food-friendly wines, as you were describing. Mm-hmm. How do you approach pairing wine and food? Do you follow rules, or do you kind of just, you don't really care? And how would you suggest other people do it?
I have a hard time with the whole wine pairing thing because, I've had this transcendent where you've had like two things and it brings together into some place so much higher pairings, but those are few and far between. And so I generally just kind of stick with basics, to be honest, and more importantly, drink what you want, and if it doesn't go with the food, it doesn't really matter. You don't. I love it when things come together, but I think people place too much concern and pressure on that. It's reds with red meat, whites and rosés with fishes. You can go Pinot Noir with salmon and stuff like that. You can go so many ways. Yeah. Don't limit yourself.
No, never limit yourself.
Yeah.
So you're working with a lot of different vineyards, and you're, throughout Oregon, obviously, primarily here in the Willamette Valley. And you've been here a good number of years.
Yeah, we're in our 18th year. Yeah.
18 years. So 18 years you've been, harvest after harvest. We know that there's vintage variation. Mm-hmm. How much variation do you see in this region? Do you see a lot of commonality from one year to another, or more dissimilarity?
It's, looking at 2011, the coldest vintage we've ever had. 2011, we started harvesting around the 22nd of October and finished on November 8th.
Wow, late.
Yes. Whereas 2015, we started harvesting on the 7th of September. And we're done by October 1st. So we see huge differences. And so when you're harvesting that early, you're more likely to be harvesting during warm weather. So you by and large, you will get a very fruity and generous wine. When you're harvesting that late into October, it's we had very low sugar. Not only was it that late, it was never warm that summer. It was never warm. We had I think the top sugars we saw that year was 22 bricks. Most of it was around 20. So those wines are just hugely different. They're not very fruity. They're very pretty and elegant and savory. And we did no whole cluster that year because they're so savory already. We don't really need more savory.
Sure.
We want enhanced fruit. But and then there's 2013 in between where it was a year much like 2019 has been, where it was a moderate summer, not hot, not cool. But we had 6 inches of rain that fell right in the middle, or actually at the beginning of harvest. Harvest had started barely, and we had 6 inches of rain show up, and that just changed everything. So there are a lot of similarities, but we're getting more kind of outlier years where they're just like left field, right field. But the last 18, 17, and 19 are kind of on that relatively slightly early track versus 14, 15, and 16 very early, and 10 and 11 very late. So
kind of like in phases, it seems like in groups.
Yeah, and the resulting wines, they're not hugely different. They're not like ones here and here, like in the warm vineyard set of 14, 15, 16. They're not, or rather warm vintage. Those wines are all different, but they're not, you wouldn't be able to, you'd have to be in the business to kind of understand like the differences, subtle differences, or really into wine, because there are very different for those who are really geeky about it, such as myself, who really pay attention to it. It's like, one, we got a little bit more heat here. You know, whenever we have these vintages, we're always trying to understand, when the heat came, what the soil moisture is like when that heat came, how the plants reacted, and what maybe trying to understand why the wine is this way versus the slightly different warm year of 2015 or the slightly different warm year of 2016. So we have, just to understand it all so we know how to approach future years.
Yeah. Are there any signs or predictors that you look for that will help you determine what a harvest is going to give you?
No, I mean, yes and no. You look at sugars, of course, and acids, and berry size, and skin, how color bleeds out of skin, and how thick the skins are, and how the tannins are. Are they bitter? Are they sweet? Or, but nothing. You never know exactly what it's going to be until it gets in the barrel, ages for a while, goes through mallow, because it's like this awkward 13-year-old, that's overgrown and doesn't really know how to control their body yet after fermentation. One day it's like great, and the next day it tastes like crap, and you're just like, what I do? And you just have to wait. And once it gets through mallow and quiets down, then you can kind of see what it is. But coming out of the fermenter, it's good or difficult. Mm-hmm. Is this going to be a challenging year, or is this going to be an easy year? But you just don't really know truly what you have until it has a good 6 months of age on it.
You need patience.
Yes.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
I know you had bottling today, and that you had a team here, mm-hmm. and people were walking out with wine when I was walking in. Mm-hmm. Do you have any sort of traditions that you do at the beginning of harvest with your team, or for yourself individually?
At the beginning, no, we always, we have lunches, and one of the things we started doing last year is during harvest, every day we have people bring wines blind. And we blind wine every day at lunch, just to kind of keep us intrigued, because some of those days you're just doing boring stuff. It's a lot of manual labor, a lot of cleaning, a lot of just moving stuff around, and it's trying to keep people remembering what we're making, because some days you don't really feel like you're making wine. You just feel like you're working in a factory, because you're just doing these repetitive tasks. Mm-hmm. But we don't have like no good luck
rituals or anything.
No. And then at the end of it, we whenever we reach a benchmark of like last fruit in, we always have champagne, but we always shotgun beers.
That's a ritual.
Yeah, that's it. But it's at the end. It's it's like last fruit in, last fermenter pressed off, last barrel filled, and any other time we just want to shotgun a beer, we do. And it's always rainier. It's always inexpensive local beer, preferably Pounders.
So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Gosh, I don't know. Race car driver.
You were a cyclist, so I guess the sports side of it was...
Yeah. I came to cycling. I was a soccer player when I was a kid, and then my knees, I had problems with my knees, and I had a doctor who said, you should try cycling. so I did, and then by the time I was 18, I was racing, and I was a bike messenger too, and then I just kept going with racing and just really loved it. And but yeah, when I was a kid, I just never... I'd have to ask my parents, honestly. I never was like, I want to do this. Uh-huh. My brother was more like that, but me, I was just kind of ADD kid. Just started like, oh, I like this now. Oh, no, I want to do that.
So how did you decide that wine was something you wanted to make?
Working in a restaurant, so I worked in restaurants to support my fledgling bike racing career. I was trying to become professional. And of course, when you're amateur, you have to travel a lot and pay entry fees and of course pay for your rent and all the food you eat, because you're usually burning through 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day when you're riding a lot. So I started working in restaurants after working in bike stores for a long time. And I had the good fortune of landing in one of Portland's best restaurants simply because I knew the right people. I had no experience whatsoever. But I knew the owner. I knew Greg Higgins, because when I was working at a bike store, he was a customer and he was a cyclist. And then I knew a couple of the employees there, and I landed there. And I've always loved food. I grew up with a mother who was a tremendous cook and a budding gourmet in the early 80s. And I mean, when I was in junior high school, I'd bring my lunch to school, and it would be like a sandwich on a croissant. And so it was stuff like that. You know, I was lucky. And so I already had I loved food. I used to cook with my mom, and then working in a restaurant, I was like, okay, you know, and the wine's really interesting too. And I was living in France and coming back. And when I was 25, I realized this is going nowhere. I'm not going to make it. I'm too old. You know, I'm not, if I haven't gotten this far by now, then it's not going anywhere. So I started really looking at what I wanted to do, what I loved. And food and wine was where I landed, and I was already there. I had the best people to work around to learn from, so I started looking at that. And at first, I was thinking chef, and but the lifestyle and culture didn't really fit me. So I quickly pushed that aside and started learning more about wine, just kind of taking more of an interest. Again, working in fine dining in Portland. I had great proximity to the wineries of the Willamette Valley. And so a lot of those winemakers came in, and you start asking a lot of questions, and people start saying, why don't you come help out for free? You know, volunteering. And volunteering led to harvest positions, and harvest positions led to full-time positions. And then after 4 years, I just decided I was going to do it, and lied to my bank and got my $20,000 theoretically for a home, and
built a wine home.
Yeah, well, built a 300 cases of wine. Of course, that wasn't enough for all of it, but I just kind of kept working 2 jobs and just kept building it up and paying for it. Yeah.
So, do you ever have free time? And if so, what do you do in your free time?
I ride my bike. I ride, you know, still anywhere from 100 to 200 miles a week. It's never as much as I want, but honestly, it keeps me sane. I mean, it calms me down.
How many miles are we from Portland?
We're about 45.
Do you ever ride?
I don't usually ride here because then I have to get home, and it's, you know, it would be about 3, because the way I'd ride, it would probably be about 60 or 55 because you'd stay off the main roads. And then I'd be here, and then I'd have to get 3 hours home, and that would leave a few hours to work. But I used to do it on occasion, but when I was further north. But you know, no, I can ride that far, no problem. But it's just not conducive to time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I also get out to our cabin in Mount Hood. That's the other thing I do for leisure.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And for those nights that I assume you and your wife will have romantic evenings, do you have kids?
We don't.
No kids. Oh, so you get a dog, a quietly sleeping dog over here.
Well, she's playful.
So for romantic evenings, which could be every night of the week, what?
Don't ask her this question.
What wines would you start opening up to set the mood? Make the mood.
You know, she likes whites a lot too, but champagne, of course, for me. Yeah, and rosés as well, especially like Bandel. I like, you know, something a little bit deeper. But boy, I mean, the Chablis is a really easy go-to in that vibrant kind of intensity, and it just there's so much. I mean, Sancerre, Melon de Bourgogne, you know, but mainly, yeah, white wines.
Yeah. So you were talking about starting with 300 cases. You're at 10,000 cases now. You've said a lot of great markers of what you've achieved so far. But is there one thing that you would say is your proudest achievement in your work to date?
Oof. Gosh, I don't know. I don't think about these things very much. I always look at what's next, and that's a problem sometimes. I don't know when to stop. No, I mean, it's just, honestly, it's just creating a successful business on its own, away from the winemaking. It's which is why I got into it. But one thing I mean, not that I learn every year, and I continue to learn. When I started, I didn't know very much, and I learned that very quickly. But what's the most successful? Yeah, I guess my proudest thing is like getting through the financial crisis. It was still having a successful business. Because that almost put me out of business, and a lot of people. I mean, it was hard, and we own the company outright. We don't have investors. It's so it's a big deal for me. It was hard. We had to leverage assets and so forth just to double the second mortgage of your home and so forth to get through it. So that's probably the proudest thing over anything. It's like we persevered, and that's why we grew this big. Is we found we had to grow production at lower price points. That was our way out of that, because it became very hard to sell more expensive wine. Mm-hmm. And I had volume of a certain point, and I needed just to make more at that lower price point.
Yeah, that's an accomplishment. It's tough to come through and to have a successful business for the number of years you have. And starting it, it's a fair, proud achievement. Looking back.
Well, I mean, it would sound so much better to say something like some wine I made that got some great accolade. But no, it's like, no, I didn't destroy my business or my marriage. So two wonderful things.
I think that's fantastic. Congratulations. Yeah. Going back, I mean, from any walk of life and in all the times you've been, has there been any one piece of advice that has really carried you through all that, and who gave it to you?
It's something that, it's a great piece of advice, something that I need to remind myself of more and more as I grow. And it was written inside of a friend's winery. He started a few years before me, and I remember looking at it at the time like, that's stupid. and over time, it's like, oh, yeah, I know what that means. And it was just a simple statement he had painted on his walls. First, make the wine. And it's because as your business grows, as this business grows, and as more competitive and difficult it gets to find market share, to find market for all your wines, you have the infinite amount of opportunity to spend so much time on the sales and marketing aspects of it. And it's just a reminder of like, no, that's first. That's always first. And because if you don't do that well, then the other stuff doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And that came from Jim Prosser from J.K. Carrier Wines. And he's a friend still. And yeah, it's, again, something I keep reminding myself, because we grow and I get pulled in too many different directions. And of course, I never have enough help. So it's always, no, focus. And that's one of the things I love about harvest, is it's like one of the few times a year where it's just so single-minded. It's like, no, I do this, and I ignore everything else until I have a little space, and then I look at it. But through the rest of the year, I mean, I'm constantly getting pulled. As I said before, it's every time I look at my email, I'm behind. Just further behind. It's like, don't look at it. And during harvest, I allow myself not to look at my email.
I think that's a good thing in general, advice, even if you don't make wine, to do one thing primarily. If there was another piece of advice, something you could share with our listeners, what advice would you like to give them?
Boy, this is going to be one of those long pauses you're going to have to edit out. That's not the advice. One piece of advice is, is something, and this is something that I have to remind myself of too, is that nobody gets in the wine business to make it rich. It is a business about life. in living and sharing and just enjoyment and hospitality. And that is partly why I got into it. I worked in the hospitality business, and this is kind of at the front end of that. And just to remind yourself to enjoy the life, because I get so caught up in what I'm doing, and it's this focus on all parts of the business that I just have to remember to stop and enjoy.
Yeah. So before we stop and enjoy some wine, I am wondering if you can complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
no table at all. Like a workbench. Let's see. Yeah.
So if you could imagine a scenario where someone from any walk of life, living or deceased, was photographed, and in that photograph was a bottle of your wine, who would you want that person to be drinking your wine?
Jeez, that's a tough one. There's also many. And of course, I'm going to sound so smart right now. Let's see. It's a tough one. Right away I think artist, but I also think more of a literary. Actually, one of my favorite authors from high school, Kurt Vonnegut. I loved his writing because it was always out there and yet very current as far as like what's going on in the world at the time it was written. Douglas Coupland, I think it is. Is that the guy? The guy who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guides to the Galaxy, which the 4-book trilogy. Because those were just such satire on society, and smart and fun. Making fun of everything, less serious and more just about making fun in a very of society in a very cheeky way. Yeah.
So they're sitting at a table together enjoying your wine right now.
There we go. Yeah.
So, if you mentioned earlier, your island wine was a champagne, if you were going to a deserted island, what 3 wines would you take with you?
3? Well, I mean, that would be actually, champagne. It would be Pinot Noir. It'd be probably, Von Romanet or something. And then, it's hard to do if it would be white Burgundy or Nebbiolo, Barbaresco, or Barolo.
I know.
I have champagne. I might go
sneak that 4th bottle in your luggage.
There we go. I always have wine in my luggage. That's why I always have to check my bag.
So now I want you to take those wines, and maybe a couple others we talked about, and I want you to pair them with music. Because, music plays such a role. We listen to it. It inspires us. It sets moods. Wine puts us in moods. And sometimes a wine can make us think of a type of music or vice versa. So let's start with that champagne. And what kind of music you want to listen to?
Champagne, it to me, it's so Chopin-y, just bouncy and floral and lively, very, I'm not a big Chopin person, but I know it a little bit. Great movie.
And that's what came to mind.
But yeah, it's what came to mind, yes. But for like the Vone, it would be something a little bit more dark and brooding. I think a little bit more of my 90s, kind of 80s kind of punk rock. Maybe some Black Flag, maybe some Henry, or Bauhaus or Peter Murphy. And then.
Well, going back to what about the white Burgundy?
White Burgundy. Sadly, the song that came in my head was not the one I want to be associated with, but I'm going to say it anyway. Not sing it because I can't sing, which is Nights in White Satin.
Oh.
No, but that's not it. I think a little bit more jazzy the style, jazzy vocals. There's a Fiona Apple, who's kind of a newer. She's not. I mean, probably 15 years. She's been around now, 20 years. But kind of jazz, but newer jazz pop would work with that.
And going to some of your wines, what about your Gamay?
That would be more like Childish Gambino or something, a little bit more current, a little bit more punchy and lively, or even could be more of that livelier punk, maybe not Husker Du, but other Minnesota band, Replacements. Yeah, the Replacements.
And your Melon de Bourgogne?
That could be also in the similar vein, but maybe Sleater Kinney.
And of course, Pinot Noir.
Of course.
One of your single blocks that you were talking about, or single vineyard.
More Miles Davis, kind of. Yeah. Kind of blue.
Okay, I'm going to stop challenging on this one, although you've done very well.
Yeah, I really wish my mind was a little bit more awake for this, because I was like, oh, these are a little basic.
John, tell me, you've traveled a bit. Where's one place in the world, one wine region in the world that is on the top of your bucket list to hit next?
I haven't been to Burgundy in a long time, and the last time I was there was my honeymoon, so I wasn't really going through cellars or anything.
You didn't drag her through cellars? I'm impressed.
No, that wouldn't be. We did go to one in Italy, but anyway, I would like to see the volcanic, like Sardinia or Sicily. I'd really like to go down there, and because those wines are something I'm getting into a little bit more. Those volcanic islands, and just they're really interesting, and how fresh and vibrant they can be with such intense baked heat. It would be interesting to understand them better. Yeah.
Well, for you'll start planning your trip, but for those who want to plan their trips up here to Willamette Valley and to get to know your wines, can you remind us where we can visit you and where we can find you?
Yeah, we're in the Eola Amity Hills, so we're about 20 minutes south of McMinnville, and about 20 minutes north of Salem on Eola Hills Road. Easy to remember. But we are only open on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, noon to 5, and by appointment, as we can make it work. Unfortunately, we can't accommodate every day, but yeah. So about an hour from Portland as well.
Well, fantastic. Well, it's definitely worth coming out here. Beautiful views, great wines, fun atmosphere, and a very mellow dog sleeping nearby.
She knows when to stop.
John, thank you so much for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack, and we'll see you again in the Willamette Valley.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.